around 540 million years ago, so the story goes. One creature did something no animal had done before. It killed on purpose. Life had been a quiet garden of soft, drifting blobs until one day somebody started eating the neighbors. An arms race began, and a meter-long monster called Anomalocaris rose to the top, crushing armored trilobites like walnuts. Great story, but two of its biggest beats are wrong. The first murder is older than the Cambrian. The famous apex predator has been demoted, and the real killer was never caught. So let's start where everyone starts, with the version you've probably heard. For most of Earth's history, nothing hunted anything. For billions of years, the planet belonged to microbes, slime and scum and mats of bacteria, and not one thing on it had any interest in eating anything else that could eat back. Then, late in a stretch of time called the Ediacaran, the first big organisms showed up, and they are properly strange. Flat, quilted, frond-shaped things anchored to the sea floor. Ribbed ovals lying on the microbial mats like discarded floor tiles. Feathery fans standing in the current. Most of them had no mouth, no gut, no eyes, and no way to chase or bite. As far as anyone can tell, they just sat there and soaked up nutrients through their skin while the ocean drifted past. People call it the Garden of Ediacara, and the name fits. It was soft, it was still, and nobody was eating anybody. Why did it stay peaceful for so long? Part of the answer is chemistry. Hunting is expensive. Chasing, grabbing, and digesting another animal burns a lot of energy. And for most of the planet's early history, the oceans probably didn't hold enough oxygen to bankroll that kind of lifestyle at any real size. So life idled. Some of these creatures grew in a strange fractal pattern, the same branching shape repeating at smaller and smaller scales, with no head and no tail and no front, like nothing alive today. The first good fossil of one turned up in those same English hills in the 1950s, spotted by a schoolchild, and it stunned scientists because everyone had assumed those rocks were far too old to hold any animals at all. That single discovery cracked open a whole hidden chapter of life. And in that chapter, for a very long time, the worst thing that could happen to you was getting buried alive by mud. Nothing hunted you, because nothing had learned how. Then, right around the base of the Cambrian, the garden ends. The fossil record suddenly fills up with claws and spines and armor and eyes, trilobites in their thousands, worms with teeth, swimming hunters the size of your forearm. This is the Cambrian explosion, the burst of evolution where the animal kingdom basically invents itself, and the usual explanation for why it turned so violent so fast is an arms race. Something started hunting. Prey evolved defenses, hunters evolved sharper weapons, and the whole thing spiraled upward. Standing at the very top of that food chain, in every documentary and every classroom diagram, is Anomalocaris, a meter-long swimmer with two spiny, grasping arms folded under a face like a pineapple ring, lined with teeth. The apex predator, the great white shark of the Cambrian, cracking trilobites open for lunch. But there's a problem with that story. The killing is older than the crime scene everyone keeps pointing at, and the shark of the Cambrian may not have been able to bite through a trilobite at all. So let's do this properly. Let's treat it like a cold case, and let's start by checking the timeline, because even that turns out to be shaky. That round number you always hear, 540 million years ago, is a convenient handle, not a hard fact. The boundary between the Ediacaran and the Cambrian keeps getting remeasured, and the current best estimate, from radioactive dating of volcanic ash near the boundary, actually puts it a little later, closer to 539 million years ago. The exact figure matters less than what it implies, because when you go hunting for the earliest evidence of one animal deliberately killing another, you don't find it sitting neatly at that boundary, you find it earlier, millions of years earlier, down in the garden itself, in rock that was supposed to be peaceful. So who's our oldest suspect? In 2007, geologists were cleaning a rock face in Charnwood Forest in the English Midlands when they uncovered a fossil about the length of your hand. It sat in the collection for years before anyone worked out what they were looking at. When they finally did, in a paper published in 2022, they realized they had the oldest animal predator known to science. They named it Auroralumina attenboroughii. The first part means dawn lantern, because the thing looks uncannily like an Olympic torch, tentacles flickering off the top like flames. The second part honours David Attenborough, who hunted for fossils in those exact Leicestershire hills as a boy. Auroralumina is a relative of jellyfish, corals and sea anemones, and it's built like a tiny bouquet. 2 branching stalks, each ending in a cup, and each cup ringed with dense little tentacles, all of it held up in a rigid organic frame. If you know how a modern anemone or a coral polyp makes its living, you already know how this animal killed. Those tentacles were loaded with stinging cells, microscopic harpoons that fire on contact, inject venom and drag the prey in. It didn't chase anything. It didn't need to. The animal sat in the current with its arms open and waited for small drifting things, plankton, tiny larvae, whatever was passing, to blunder into the wrong place. That's hunting. It's the exact same trick a jellyfish is running on some unlucky shrimp in the ocean tonight. That trick is nastier than it sounds. The stinging cell a cnidarian fires is about the most elaborate single cell any animal builds, a pressurized capsule that shoots out a coiled venom-tipped thread in one of the fastest movements known anywhere in biology, quicker than you can blink and far quicker than most prey can react. Work published in 2024 traced the family tree of these cells and found they were already branching into different specialized forms back in the Precambrian, before the Cambrian fossil boom. In other words, the weapons were diversifying before the war supposedly started. Whatever else Auroralumina was, it was carrying a seriously advanced armament for its age. This is the detail that reframes the whole timeline. Auroralumina is roughly 560 million years old. That's about 20 million years before the Cambrian, and around 20 million years older than the next oldest predator anyone has ever found. It's also the oldest animal we know of that built itself a skeleton, that rigid frame, holding those hunting arms up into the water where the food was. Hold on to that, because skeletons and killing turn out to be tangled together in a way the popular story completely misses. The fossil itself only survived because it seems to have been swept down the flank of an underwater volcano and buried in ash, frozen in place at the moment a whole seafloor community got knocked flat. But there's a catch, and any honest detective has to say it out loud. We've got exactly 1 specimen. 1. Everything we've said about the first predator on Earth rests on a single squashed fossil the size of a torch. The scientists who found it are fairly sure more are out there in those rocks, waiting. That's the strange thing about reading Deep Time. Sometimes an entire turning point in the story of life, the invention of hunting itself, hangs on one lucky slab of rock that happened to survive when everything around it rotted away to nothing, and stinging tiny plankton to death while it counts as hunting isn't quite the murder our story promised. For that, we need a victim with armor. We need a body with a hole in it. That body exists. Its name is Cloudina. Cloudina was one of the very first animals to armor up. While the rest of the garden stayed soft and defenseless, this little creature learned to pull calcium carbonate straight out of seawater and build itself a shell. A stack of nested cones piled up like a run of ice cream cones jammed one inside the next. It's the earliest animal known to have made a hard mineral skeleton, and it turns up in the late Ediacaran, in that same window before the Cambrian, on nearly every continent on Earth. Cloudina also pulled off something no animal had managed before it. It built reefs. In Namibia, around 548 million years ago, these little cones cemented themselves to one another, generation stacking on generation, into the earliest animal reefs we know of. A reef is just a crowd, individuals packing together, gluing themselves down, safer in a mob than any of them would ever be alone. The same instinct that makes a herd bunch up on the open plains. Something out there was already making it dangerous to be exposed, and by yourself. In a collection of Cloudina fossils from Shaanxi province in China, somebody found the smoking gun. Holes. Neat, round, deliberate holes, bored clean through the shell wall. In a study published back in 1992, researchers went through more than 500 of these little tubes and found that a fraction of them, under 3%, carried these rounded punctures, each one between 40 and 400 micrometers across. At the small end, that's narrower than a human hair, and the sizes weren't random. The size of the hole tracked the size of the tube it was drilled into, exactly what you'd expect if something was boring into these animals to eat them and matching its victims to its own size. These are the oldest predatory drill holes in the entire fossil record. 500 million years before the invention of any murder weapon you'd recognize, the weapon here left a wound you'd need a microscope to see. This wasn't a one-off. Later work on a different Cloudina population from southern Shaanxi found the attack was far more common there, with more than 1 in 5 shells bored straight through. Somebody was working that neighborhood hard. If that method sounds familiar, it should. Go to a beach today and pick through a pile of empty seashells, and you'll find some with a neat round hole punched through the side, drilled by a predatory sea snail that grips its victim and rasps a doorway into the shell to eat the animal inside. That exact murder method is still in business right across the world's oceans. It's just that the oldest known example of it is more than 500 million years old. So now we've got a body and a cause of death. Time to work out how the killer operated, because this is where it stops looking like blind luck and starts looking like a professional. When you map out where the holes sit, they aren't scattered anywhere on the shell. They cluster at a fairly consistent distance from the opening of the tube, as if the driller was deliberately staying away from the business end, either the part of the animal that could resist, or the part safely buried down in the sediment. Maybe the older section of tube was usually socked into the mud, maybe some sensory cue told the predator where to bite. Either way, that's not random nibbling, that's a hunter that has learned where the soft spot is. Then there are the holes that don't go all the way through, incomplete borings, attacks that started and stopped partway. And those are one of the most interesting things in the whole record, because a failed hole means the armor sometimes work. It means these two animals, predator and prey, were already locked in a contest that either side might win on a given day. That shell wasn't decoration, it was doing its job, and sometimes it saved a life. And there's the alibi that clears everyone else in the neighborhood. Living right alongside Cloudina was another tube-building animal called cynotubulites. Same seafloor, same era, similar kind of body. And in the fossils, cynotubulites shows up with no drill holes at all. None. The killer walked right past one kind of prey to get to another. It was choosing, prey selection, precise targeting, and a countermeasure it sometimes lost to. This deep in the Ediacaran, in rock older than the Cambrian, predation was already this careful. There's only one thing missing from this case. We've got the wound, and we can read the pattern in it. We have the victim and the murder weapon. What we don't have is the killer. Nobody has ever found the animal that drilled those holes. The leading guess is some kind of early mollusk-like creature, something soft that just didn't fossilize, which is a deeply unsatisfying answer, and, so far, the honest one. Our oldest confirmed murder is an unsolved one. The body's on the slab, the suspect got away clean, and it's been getting away for well over 500 million years. So why does any of this matter beyond a good mystery? Because of what sits right next to the crime scene. Cloudina's mineral shell, one of the first hard skeletons on the planet, shows up in the record at essentially the same moment as the first animals drilling through shells. Armor, and the tools to defeat armor, arriving together, and a lot of researchers now think that's no coincidence at all. Animals started burning precious energy to build rock around their soft bodies because something out there had begun trying to eat them. Predation may be the entire reason skeletons exist, and the moment armor appeared, it pushed the killers to invent a way through it. That's an arms race, a real one, with weapons and countermeasures and a body count. And it's already running in the Ediacaran, before the Cambrian even starts. The explosion everyone credits with inventing this stuff actually walked in after the fighting had begun. And there's a grim epilogue for our victim. Cloudina, the animal that pioneered the shell and built the first reefs, didn't make it. Right around the Ediacaran-Cambrian boundary, Cloudina and its skeleton-building neighbors vanish from the rock in what may be the earliest mass extinction of complex animals. The whole soft, strange Garden of Ediacara disappears along with them. Whether predators finished them off, or a changing ocean did, or the rise of a churning new kind of animal did, the first great cast of characters exits the stage right as the curtain goes up on ours. The pioneers of armor, armored up, and still lost. Now, killing didn't come out of nowhere either. Before anything drilled a living shell, the machinery for it was already being test-driven on easier targets. Down in the late Ediacaran seafloor of South Australia, there are trace fossils, little furrowed burrows left by small animals worming through the mats. And when you follow some of those burrows, they lead straight to the buried bodies of dead Ediacarans, creatures like the big, quilted oval Dickinsonia, corpses that had been covered over by thin sheets of sand. Something was tunneling through the muck and feeding on the dead. Scavenging. One research team described it rather beautifully, as scavenging as a prelude to predation. The mouth learned to feed on a corpse before it worked up the nerve to make one. There's a logic to that order, too. If the open Ediacaran ocean really was too starved of oxygen for big active hunters, then the safest place to start eating other organisms was exactly where these burrowers lived, down in the microbial mats, which pumped out their own local supply of oxygen. Life didn't leap straight to the chase. It crept up on the idea from underneath in the mud, working over the dead first. Around the same time, another animal was learning to graze. Cambrian, roughly 555 million years old, is usually read as an early cousin of the mollusks, and it left long, fan-shaped scrape marks fanning out across the microbial mats it lived on. The leading interpretation is that it fed with a rasping organ, a primitive tongue studded with tiny teeth, the same basic tool a snail uses to scrape algae off a rock in a pond today. Even its style was odd, staying more or less in one spot and reaching out to forage with a mouth on the end of a retractable trunk. Now, that reading is still argued over. Some serious experts think those scrape marks might just be molds of microbial threads, or the ghosts of decay, so it's fair to keep this one in pencil rather than ink. But if it's right, then the precise machinery you'd need to rasp a hole in a shell was already in the water, harmlessly scraping mats, maybe 10 million years before anyone turned it on a living neighbor. The weapon existed. It just hadn't been pointed at anything yet. If you're the kind of person who finds this stuff as ridiculous and wonderful as I do, go ahead and subscribe. This channel more or less lives in this era, and there's a lot more of it coming. So if killing was already up and running down in the garden, what was the Cambrian actually for? The Cambrian is when killing stopped being a rare event and became the entire way the ocean worked. It's the difference between the first crime and organized crime. Once hunting was common, every single lineage of prey faced the same brutal ultimatum: evolve a defense or become food, grow spines, thicken your shell, burrow deeper into the mud, get faster, or get eaten. You can see this happening in the rock. The earliest Cambrian leaves behind a strange confetti of tiny fossils, spines, scales, plates, and cones that paleontologists call the small shelly fauna. Many of these scraps are single pieces of armor, sclerites, worn by animals so small and so patchily preserved that we still can't say for certain what most of them looked like whole. What we can read plainly is the pattern. Thousands of different creatures, packed into one narrow slice of time, all discovering at once that a body is safer with hard, sharp bits bolted onto it. It's what an arms race looks like from the outside. Take the trilobites. Faced with a world of grabbing arms and drilling mouths, they turned themselves into little tanks. Some grew long defensive spines. Many learned to roll up into an armored ball, tucking every soft part inside a shield of mineralized plates. The same move a pillbug makes in your garden when you poke it. That behavior is frozen right there in the fossils. Thousands of trilobites curled up tight, some of them quite possibly caught in the act of hiding from something with teeth. There was a physical upheaval too. Those early Cambrian animals didn't just grow weapons, they started to dig. For the whole Ediacaran, the seafloor had been sealed under firm microbial mats, like cling film stretched over the mud. Then animals began burrowing down into it, churning it, aerating it, tearing up the old mat world for good. Paleontologists call it the substrate revolution, and it helped bulldoze the Garden of Ediacara into memory. And every one of those defenses put pressure straight back onto the predators to get around it, which pushed the prey again, on and on in a loop that basically never stopped. Many researchers now argue that this feedback, predator and prey shoving each other up the ladder, is a big part of why the Cambrian explosion actually exploded. Oxygen levels mattered. Geology mattered. but so did the plain fact that once things started eating each other, evolution finally had a reason to hurry. But the arms race needed one more ingredient to really catch fire. It needed to be able to see. For a long time, hunting in these ancient seas was a close contact business. You stung whatever touched you. You drilled whatever you were already sitting on. But then something evolved: eyes. Real eyes. In the Emu Bay Shale of South Australia, in rock about 515 million years old, paleontologists dug up fossilized eyes, and not just faint outlines. Actual, preserved compound eyes, each one built from more than 16,000 individual lenses. For comparison, a modern dragonfly, a famously sharp-eyed hunter, has somewhere around 28,000. A common housefly makes do with about 3,000. These ancient eyes are in the same league as the best-sighted insects flying today, and they belonged to Anomalocaris, our supposed apex predator. They were so rare in the rock, the researchers turned up only 2 of them among some 5,000 specimens, pear-shaped and mounted on stalks so the animal could aim its vision like a pair of headlights. Those eyes did something else too. For years, people had argued about what Anomalocaris even was. Compound eyes settled it, because that style of eye, thousands of lenses packed onto a curved surface, is the hallmark of the arthropods, the enormous group that includes insects, crabs, and trilobites. So, Anomalocaris was an early arthropod cousin. The timing is the striking part. This lineage evolved superb eyes before it evolved jointed legs or a hard outer shell. Vision came first. The senses raced out ahead of the armor. The prey were watching back. Trilobites, the great success story of the Cambrian, grew some of the strangest eyes in the history of life. Lenses made of calcite, actual crystal, little windows of stone you could see through. Each lens was a single crystal of calcite grown with its optical axis pointing straight down, the one alignment that stops calcite from splitting whatever it sees into a double image. Both sides of the arms race were pouring everything into vision, because in clear, shallow, sunlit water, the animal that spots the other one first usually gets to write the ending. A hunter that can see changes everything. The moment it can pick out prey across open water, that prey has to spot the hunter coming, or hide, or outrun it. And a slow shoving match between armor and teeth turns into a flat sprint. The eyes poured fuel straight onto the fire, which brings us, finally, back to Anomalocaris itself, the star of the story, the trilobite cruncher. Picture the animal for a second. A streamlined body, maybe a meter long, rippling along on rows of flexible side flaps like a living hovercraft, 2 segmented spiny arms reaching out in front, and that circular plated mouth tucked underneath. In a world where most animals were smaller than your thumb, it was a leviathan, and this is where the popular version falls apart. For over a century, Anomalocaris took the blame for a lot of damaged trilobites. Paleontologists kept finding trilobite fossils with chunks bitten out or shells crushed, and the obvious culprit was the big, scary swimmer with the grasping claws. Case closed. Except in 2023, researchers finally put the animal on trial. The team built a 3-dimensional model of those front appendages, borrowed living whip scorpions and whip spiders as stand-ins to see how the segments would bend and grab, before running the whole thing through the kind of engineering stress analysis you'd use on a bridge or an aircraft part. They even dropped the model into simulated water to work out the posture it swam in. The claws failed. Not in the ocean, in the simulation. The model showed that if Anomalocaris tried to grab and crush a hard, mineralized trilobite, it would have wrecked its own appendages doing it. The force it could generate came out to just a few newtons, roughly the effort it takes you to press a single key on a keyboard. That's fine for snatching something soft and quick. A worm, a jellyfish, a baby arthropod whose shell hasn't hardened yet. It is nowhere near enough to crack a trilobite, whose shell is essentially a slab of rock. Its round mouth tells the same story, built from flexible plates for handling soft tissue, not a nutcracker. The scariest looking animal in its entire world was almost certainly a soft prey specialist. All those crushed trilobites, everyone pinned on it for 100 years. Probably the work of somebody else entirely. The researcher who led that work put it nicely. In the old picture, these giants treated the Cambrian seafloor like an all-you-can-eat buffet, grabbing whatever they pleased. Real food webs turn out to be fussier and more complicated than that, full of specialists eating specific things, which is exactly how real ecosystems behave. Even the monster at the top had a diet. So the apex predator keeps its crown, just not for the reason we were told. Anomalocaris didn't rule by brute force. It ruled with those extraordinary eyes and raw speed, a fast, sharp-sighted hunter running down the soft and the slow. Still terrifying. Not quite the walnut-cracking bruiser from the diagrams. Step back from the individual suspects for a second, because what all this killing built is still standing today. Before predation, life had no real structure. Nearly everything was a kind of producer, sitting on the seafloor, soaking up nutrients, quietly minding its own business on the same flat level as everything else. The moment some animals started eating other animals, that flat world folded up into layers. Now there were producers and grazers eating them, and hunters eating the grazers, and scavengers cleaning up behind all of them. Every layer wired to the others. That's a food web, and predation is what wove the very first one. Stacking that flat world into a pyramid, energy started flowing in a new direction. Upward, out of the sunlit producers and into the bodies of things that ate other things, with every rung of the ladder skimming a little for itself. That upward flow of energy through living things eating one another is, in a real sense, what an ecosystem is. Predation didn't just add violence to the world. It built the plumbing that all life still runs through. It also wrote the first rule that every ecosystem on Earth still obeys today. Your position in that web, what eats you and what you eat, shapes your whole existence. Every antelope watching the tree line, every house cat stalking a bird across a lawn, is playing a game whose rules were carved into Ediacaran mud by animals we can barely name. Once that game started, there was no switching it off. Complexity became permanent, because in a world with predators in it, standing still is just a slow way to die. So let's close the case, or at least be honest about how much of it stays open. We came looking for the one creature that invented killing, and the honest answer is that there isn't one, or at least not one we can name. What we've got instead is a lineup. Auroralumina, the dawn lantern, is the oldest hunter we can actually put a name to, stinging its tiny prey in the dark, a full 20 million years before the Cambrian. The Cloudina driller is the oldest attacker we can catch in the act, leaving those perfect little murder holes in armored victims, except we have never once identified the hand that held the drill. And underneath both of them are the scavengers and the grazers, quietly assembling the mouthparts that killing would eventually demand. Predation almost certainly existed in other forms too, soft body against soft body, leaving no mark in the rock at all. Murders with no evidence and no memory. Which of them counts as the first killer? Depends on what you think killing even is. Was it the first animal to hunt, the first to attack something that could fight back, or the first to leave a body we can autopsy? Each suspect owns a different one of those firsts, and no single fossil owns them all. We should be just as honest about the why. Nobody has fully cracked why the Cambrian explosion happened when it did. Maybe oxygen finally crept over a threshold that let big active hunters exist. Perhaps the slow breakup of an ancient supercontinent flooded the world with shallow sunlit seas and washed nutrients into them. It could be that animals stumbled onto a new genetic toolkit that let bodies get complicated in a hurry. Or maybe it was the predation feedback loop itself, doing what it does. The current best guess is probably some of all of it at once, and anyone who tells you the case is fully closed is selling you something. But this is the part I can't quite shake. Every predator alive today, the shark, the wolf, the spider in the corner of your ceiling, even the clever ape who invented the mousetrap, is running software that first booted up in a quiet garden of blobs more than 500 million years ago. Somebody down there, some soft, nameless thing we'll almost certainly never find, took the first bite that mattered, and every hunt since has just been a sequel. That's the strange gift of the first killer. It didn't only end one life in the Ediacaran, it kicked off the arms race that would eventually grind out eyes and brains and speed and armor and, a very long way down the line, us. Sitting here, 500 million years later, telling the story back. All of this complexity, everything you are, is in some deep sense a monument to something very old, being afraid of getting eaten. If chasing that kind of mystery back through deep time sounds like a good evening to you, subscribe and stick around. There are older graves, stranger creatures, and better cold cases where this one came from, and I'll see you at the next one.